Good morning, Lamala.
Good morning, Lamala.
Jaho Maharaj, Maharani, Mahasiddha, Mahasiddini. Sangye, Chotan, Sokishonam La, Janjabara, Dani, Kimsuchi, Dagi, Jenso, Java, Sonam, Gidrola, Penser, Sanga, Drupasho, Sanga, Chotam, Sokishonam La, Janjabara, Dani, Kimsuchi. Dagi, Jenso, Java, Sonam, Gidrola, Penser, Sanga, Drupasho, Drola, Penser, Sanga, Drupasho, Drola, Penser, Sanga, Sanjan Tamshi Javatam, they were good in Tamarkachi, Sanjan Tamshi, Dungalton, Dungangi, good in Tawarkachi, Sanjan Tamshi, Dungamewa, Dawatami, Tawarkachi, Sanjan Tamshi, Yaran, Charanila Neme, Tanyon La Nepa, Gucci, Oma Soba, Washoda Sabadama Soba, Washodo Hong, Hong Pa, Ni, Tu, Gyor. Yeah, so today we're going to explore a little bit the quite popular practice of the 35 Buddhas. I, 5 minutes ago, sent Jonas 2 tankas on Zoom for him to share because he's a sharing kind of guy. But don't irritate him. He's been taking blacksmithing. He's got swords. The 35 Buddhas. I wanted to start by showing this one and just say a little bit about it. We see the 35 Buddhas around, but at the top, at the center, we see Amitaya, healing Buddha. In other words, the practice of the 35 Buddhas is kind of a, you could say, karmic healing that you have to drag it down like that, I think, so we can see Amitaya. There he is, that little old smiling Amitaya. Just like this fella over my right shoulder. And we'll be looking into that healing practice for all the various levels of healing, both on generation stage and completion stage, after a few weeks. And to Amitayas's left is Shakyamuni Buddha. In the chanting of the names of the 35 Buddhas, his numero uno, the big cheese, the head honcho. Just call him the boss. Because, of course, the lineage of practice comes down to Buddha Shakyamuni, is formulated by Buddha Shakyamuni, and passes down over the generations. In Tibetan commentaries, it's often said that there are 2 main lineages coming down from the Buddha, and one of those comes to Nagarjuna. And in the Nagarjuna lineage, each of the 35 Buddhas holds his own hand implement. So if you look at iconographically on Google web search or on any of the sites that have tankas like HimalayanArt.org or TibetanArt.com or so on, you will find many different presentations of the 35 Buddhas. But the one in which they all hold various hand implements basically is the lineage coming from Nagarjuna. And I think the hand implement, it's a little bit connected with Tantra. Like Clint Eastwood in the movie The Unforgiven, and when he goes into the saloon and he's facing Gene Hackman and a group of people who have killed his buddy. What's he called? Morgan Freeman. And he goes to shoot the bartender, and Gene Hackman says, he's unarmed. And Clint Eastwood shoots him and says he should have armed himself if he was going to kill my buddy. So I think the lineage from Nagarjuna is perhaps suggesting that side of Tantra where bodhisattvas hold specific implements, sort of signifying their activity aspect. In other words, all Buddhas represent enlightenment, all bodhisattvas represent the Mahayana uh, practice of the two bodhicittas. The hand implement sort of represents a specific function or application, or perhaps we could even go right downtown and use a big word like yoga. And the other lineage coming from Asanga. And the Asanga lineage tends not to have hand implements, but to be simple, just plain Buddhas. And these 35 then come to Tibet, and they come in the early days with the Nyingma school, people like Janta Rakshita, who was the monk who was brought to Tibet by Trisong Dutsen and built Samye Monastery. He had some problems building it with some of the barons who were against spending money on a temple for foreigners like Buddhism. So they brought in Padmasambhava to help with that. But if with this painting here, I'll just say a little bit more, we'll notice if you scroll down on it or pull it up a little bit, Jonas, that they tend to be in the colors of the five Buddhas. And some paintings also put them in the hand postures of the five Buddhas. I did have a couple of very early paintings. And the reason why I wanted to do the 35 Buddhas is because often before doing Tantra, you'll do an intensive, either with 100,000 prostrations or 100,000 recitations and so forth of certain kind of practices. But usually in Dalai Lama school, we don't use numbers so much. It's more by an individual thing with your own teacher will say, what do you think I should do for my next step? And the teacher will say this, that, or the other. And sometimes they'll give you good news, like do 100,000 Vajrasattva mantras, but you only have to actually say it one time and visualize 100,000 of yourself. Or you only have to do it 10 times and visualize 100,000. And so on. But Marpa Lochawa, as his preliminary to tantric practice, did this, which is why I like it a lot, because Marpa was supposed to get a little bit red in the face, either if he had a glass of arak, which is Tibetan moonshine, distilled barley beer. And even if he drank some barley beer, he got red in the face. And I tend to be a little red in the face on such occasions myself. Not that it's a common phenomenon. And also, if he ever got angry, he would get very red in the face because he was a little bit of a wrathful fellow. And so because Marpa did it, I thought I'd like to do mine, some prostrations along those lines. And if we do 100,000 prostrations like Marpa did with the 35 Buddhas, we basically do one for each of the names. Down and up. So we can combine this with doing prostrations, which is how I did mine. And we could, so these two lineages come through Tibet, through India, come into Tibet, and we can say, can we look at the other one now, the other tanka I sent you? Well, I could have sent you even more, huh? Yeah. So this one is a little bit, I think, more influenced by Nyingma style. And here we have the 35 Buddhas on top. And if we scroll down, We have Amitabha with the two great bodhisattvas standing beside him, Avalokiteshvara and Vajrapani. And below him, Gyaltsen Yegye, the eight bodhisattva beings. The one in the middle, if you blow him up, I'm not sure if I can recognize without getting. Okay, that's Kunrig. That's Kunrig, the Mahavajra from the Mahavajra Tantra as practice in yoga tantra, often used as a generally it's a sadhana like any other tantric sadhanas throughout one's life, but it's very popular in Nyingma as a death ritual to help the dead, help the deceased, you could say. And for that reason, so if you shrink it down a little bit so we see the whole thing. Yeah. That's beautifully shrunk. So then it comes to Tibet and becomes, I'm sure it was in Tibet long before Samye and Padmasambhava and Chantarakshita. Often we say they brought Buddhism to Tibet, or Padmasambhava brought Tantra to Tibet, but Buddhism had already been the national religion of Tibet, of all the aristocrats, which means it was government sponsored for over 150 years before they came. So we know it existed before then, but it didn't. The texts and the lineages of transmission were in various languages, not in the Buddhist, official Buddhist terminology instituted by Songtsen Gampo in about, I don't know, 625 or 630, something like that. Dates aren't so exact at that period of Tibetan history. As I often point out, because on the sexcentury system, no one's quite sure which century you're in, because they didn't number them until I think 1054 when Atisha came to Tibet. And so we see early styles. Now, this isn't an early style. I actually had a couple of early styles that I was going to put up from very ancient paintings. So one of the ones is the earliest one in the Himalayan Art Research Center's archives, image in their archives. So we'll see different styles of painting and presentation as the centuries go by. But we could say, well, when Buddhism comes to Tibet, we have the Pala style being very popular in India, coming into Nepal, up through Kashmir, up around the north of Tibet, over to Khotan. And so that Pala style comes down and comes into Tibet. And it's kind of flat, two-dimensional, you could say. And then later in Tibet, it develops a lot and makes a sort of big quantum leap when the Sakyas become Lama kings of Tibet. And I don't know the exact year, but 1230, 40, 50, something like that. I'll look it up one day. I'll Google it. Anyway. Oh no, yeah. So during Kublai Khan's time, so it'll be late 1200s, I guess. And at that time, then the Mongols started sponsoring Buddhist art in Tibet, and they ruled China, and they ruled the Silk Road going west through the Muslim territories. They ruled Iran. And so the art takes a quantum leap as Tibet becomes a kind of you could say, melting pot of Central Asian Buddhist art forms. So this one here is much later than that. It's probably 18th century or 19th century, something like that, but inspired by that. So in Tibet, we have the early lineages coming in through Chantarakshita, then Marpa popularized one in the Gupta style, and then the Sakyas and made one form very popular. And then Taranaka, another great. Well, next would be Tsongkhapa. Tsongkhapa, during his 5-year retreat, is said to have done 100,000 prostrations to each of the each of the five is said to have done 35 sets of 100 prostrations. He was the Energizer Bunny, which just doesn't run out of gas. Although a lot of people think that's probably a little bit of an exaggeration. But he also made doing very popular. And so in the Nagarjuna style, as often said, all of them had all of the 35 held implements, and in the Asanga, not so. And Tsongkhapa, when he was doing his, had repeated visions. He was a very mystical person, that would fall into trances and have sort of, you could say, treasure revelations. In Gelugpa, they didn't call them treasure revelations, but they'd call it tokpa, a kind of epiphany, or realization or vision, something like that. And it really is a kind of a treasure. And so his form became very popular until that. I was looking on my we could say archives of photographs. When I was in Mongolia, I photographed, I got a grant from the Rubin Museum in New York, the Rubin Foundation at least, to photograph a lot of the art in the National Museum, because a lot of their art wasn't photographed. So if anyone steals it, they can just make a copy and no one will ever know what the original looked like. And one of them they had two, they made the 35 Buddhas in huge appliques, maybe like 10 or 12 meters long or more, like filling a complete museum wall, just like a long strip like this with 7 Buddhas, and they made 5 of them. And that was in accordance with one of the very popular ways of practicing the 35 Buddha: yoga, meditation, spiritual endeavor, application. And hair. Each of them, the 35 Buddhas, all 35 were made with gold thread. And often we see in paintings, the 35 will all be painted with gold, but not that they necessarily are gold. But the gold is put on their bodies as an offering of gold, as kind of a greater merit, so to speak, on the part of the patron. I've mentioned before sometimes, you might have heard that in Tibet, there was no such thing as a prefabricated tanka made and hung up to be sold on the market, like you see in Nepal or Bhutan or these places. Each painting was, you could say, designed by the patron and basically centered around his or her favorite practices. So in terms of the one which is showing there, obviously, that person was a strong Kunrig practitioner, the Mahabharochana Tantra Ngumpa Nunze in Tibetan, Tantra in the Yoga Tantra class. So it's obviously that was a very strong practitioner of the Yoga Tantra. And early Nyingmas were very, very, very strong on Yoga Tantra as opposed to highest Yoga Tantra. And also the Amitabha with the 8 bodhisattvas surrounding indicates that. So in later versions, it became popular to put the 35 in 5 sets of 7. Buddha Shakyamuni was 6, and then the next 7, and the next 7, and the next 7, and the next 7, and I think that's enough 7s, right? 7, 7, 7, 7. And each one associated with one of the 5 Buddhas. In other words, this is, you could say, more of a tantric way of doing the practice. Because when you bring in the 5 Buddha families, that's Kriyacharya Yoga, highest yoga, all rely upon transformation of the 5 skandhas into the 5 Buddhas, our 5 pieces of the pie, which is me, which is you, which is the other. those 5 pieces of the pie: form, feeling, perceptions, habits, and bare consciousness or raw consciousness, into one of the 5 Buddha families, and transformation of the 5 kleshas into the 5 wisdoms. So I think people practicing as a preliminary to Tantra often do that. When that's the case, then the first 7 are generally visualized as blue, although in the paintings they will be given. The only one who isn't blue is Buddha Shakyamuni, who is golden. Golden basically because he was Tibeto-Mongolian, born from one of Buddha's father's wives, one of his wives, and that wife was golden skin with a round face, moon-like face. So Buddha was born golden skin with a round face, indicating not Indian like paintings of Sri Lanka and India like to depict, but rather looking a little more like a Korean or a Japanese or Mongolian or Tibetan, or what's that other race which has round faces? Oh yes, Chinese. And so looking a little, often it's called Mongol genetic line, Mongolian genetic line. And still today in Nepal, a lot of Nepalis have that. Now, so now we can take down the painting. But anyway, the one I found, which I couldn't find on my computer when I was looking for it, because I have it on some other hard drive, is basically there's each of these maybe 30 to 40 or 50 feet long, 5 of them, each with one set of Buddhas, and sort of indicating that way of doing. So the first set of 7 being like Akshobhya and blue, with the exception of Buddha, who's golden. The second set being like Vairochana and white, and the third set being like Ratnasambhava and yellow. The fourth set like Amitabha, red, and the 5th like Amitabha and green. But usually we don't see them painted like that. We just see them all painted in gold as an offering, gold for the superior merit. And sometimes we won't see them in rows like this. Sometimes we do see them in paintings in those 5 rows, 7 per row. But sometimes we'll just see them scattered randomly around. But if you look around, you'll probably notice 7 white ones, 7 red ones, 7 blue ones, and so forth. Now, in terms of the practice, why is it done as a preliminary practice? Because to progress from running around in circles and in one day doing, say, 10 positive karma things and 10 negative karma things, like you'll go out and you'll help a little old grandma or grandpa cross the road, and you get across the road and you'll speak very sweetly and drop that person off at the other side of the road, and they'll thank you and so forth. And someone will go by in a car and there just happens to be a puddle there that splashes water all over your $2,000 Gucci or Armani suit, and you low down, no good, blah 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 blah. I hope you bump into an elephant. Oh no, let's go for a tree. But I'm a tree lover. Let's go for a garbage can, big metal garbage can. So we do like some positive, negative, some positive, some negative. We do it in our body. We do it with our speech, and we do it in our mind. We sit and meditate and contemplate love, impermanence, compassion, wisdom, so on and so forth. But at the same time, then we get up and we think that someone insulted us the day before and growl, murder, grumble. Or we'll see something on TV and we'll think, oh, I wish I had that, and desire, craving. So our mind is sort of flipping between ignorance, attachments, and irritations, prides and jealousies, and the 3 or 5 or 6 root klesha, or the 84,000, the pantheon of 84,000 klesha. And when the mind engages, then the speech is triggered. We say something, or we articulate it verbally and give it a very pointed direction, such as the fellow who splashed us with water while we were driving by. Sometimes when I'm driving along the street and I see a splash of water, I'll purposely go through it to splash someone. Because also, if you do that with the bodhicitta motivation and they get angry at you, it makes a karmic connection. And then you say a mantra and they have a karmic connection with that mantra. I read that in one Nyingma text that I translated many years ago. If all else fails, make the person a little bit irritated with you, and at least it's a karmic connection. Then you say a few mantras and the karmic connection becomes a positive karmic connection. So when we went through the Vajrasattva practice, and we can do that as a preliminary, for a weekend, or what's called a nyintun, a 1-day practice, or we can do it as a 30-day practice, or sometimes Tibetans do it as a 72-day practice, one for each of the 72 channels of the body and so forth. Or we can just do it as a part of our sadhana, yamataka, chakrasavara, whatever. Or we can do it as an evening practice to review the day. So people who do the 35 Buddhas memorize it, and it's very beautiful to chant in Tibetan. So I memorized it when I was like in 1973 or 1974. It was, I think, the first Tibetan text I memorized, because you can't take your piece of paper and chant a name and then do a prostration, get up, and now where was I? Oh, you're Station Shipa. So people always memorize it, and it's only about 3 or 4 pages, so it's not too difficult to memorize. And Tibetans do have a medicine called Tumperpewa Men, the memory increasing medicine. So you pop a couple of those and it's lickety split, you've got the whole thing memorized. So the idea is that to accomplish enlightenment, we have to do, that's often in Tibetan called Sogni. There are 2 collections, a collection of merit and a collection of wisdom. Collection of merit comes from the first 5 paramitas of generosity and discipline and patience and joy and samadhi. And wisdom is largely the meditation on nature of emptiness or non-self and atma, both of one's own being and of the objects of one's perception. Sometimes joy and samadhi, or joy and meditation, are put as could go either way. If you're doing in terms of the first 3 paramitas, they go that way. If you're doing in terms of your vipassana examination of nature of self, or penetrating observation of nature of self, they can go with wisdom. But in these 2, then to fulfill these 2, then we do, it's often said it's good to remove obstacles to the path. A little bit like if you're going to write something on the blackboard, you've just been you've purposely farted in your schoolroom to make everyone laugh while the teacher was turned away, and the teacher hears you and knows it was you and hears everyone laugh. And so turns around and looks at you and says, okay, Jonas, I know it was you. Come to the blackboard. And she makes you erase everything on the blackboard, and you write, I, Jonas, We'll not do this again. She makes you write it like 100 times in front of that. So you wipe the blackboard clean. You notice I said Jonas, not Gosha, because I'm a sexist. Out of respect. What is it? Little boys are made of sugar. Little boys are made of snakes and snails and puppy dog tails, and girls of sugar and spice and all things nice. I shouldn't laugh at my own jokes, but sometimes I can't help it. So we make a clean slate. And on the clean slate, part of the cleaning of the slate is sort of letting go of any negativity. But first, Sanamsa, we generate some positive energy or positive karma. So we start, the Tibetan text start with I, who am called such and such. In this case, because it was a fart in the classroom, we'll say Jonas. Chu Dakni, Lama la Kepsu Chu, Sangila Kepsu Chu, Chola Kepsu Chu, Gendun la Kepsu Chi. Go for turn for spiritual inspiration or spiritual power, or go for refuge, whichever word you like to use, to Buddha Dharma Sangha. And so that's any Buddhist practice usually starts with that practice. So this word shakpa in Tibetan, which is the open and gentle sambatumala shakpa, often translated as confession, which is not a good translation. As I mentioned when we did Vajrasattva, shakpa means to split open or to release. Like if you come into a room and it's a vegetarian place and everyone was eating Indian food and lots of beans. This happened when we did the Goenka Vipassana retreat in Dharamsala. You've got like 50 or 60 people all eating beans for lunch. In the afternoon, the place smells a little bit rank. People cannot help it. And you open the windows and you let that not so sweet aroma dissolve into the infinite aeration of the planet. So Shakpa has that kind of meaning. You open, release, and whatever negative karma is there, it kind of loses its power. It's like if you have a fault and you look at it, face it, and let it go, then that's the first step on the path to healing, you could say, the path to progress on the spiritual path and so forth. As long as you're not aware, it's like, I don't know, having, it's often in English, we have the expression egg on your face. You know, people will eat egg in the morning and they get a little bit of egg right there, or spinach in your teeth, a big piece of spinach between your teeth. And either of those, you're talking to someone and they can't take their mind off that egg on your face or the spinach in your teeth. And, you know, they don't really notice that you're extremely handsome or beautiful and you're saying very intelligent things, and all they can think is that poor guy or gal, egg on his face, spinach in his teeth, and that spinach is like flapping around with every word he says. And we sort of want to take a pair of tweezers and go, or take a wet wipe and go, okay, start over. What were you saying? So in a way, Shakpa has that kind of meaning, opening up, letting it go. I think the original came from India, which was a wood burning country because it's a lot of jungles, so people take fire. And when you get it, you often split your wood open. And when you split wood open, often like termite kind of bugs and those which drill holes through wood, and they make babies inside, and they come and go from those little holes in the wood. When you split it open, they all like fly away or run away, depends on what might be. If it's like tree moths and tree wasps and things like that, they fly, and otherwise they scramble like, I'm out of here, buddy. So it's the same with our negative karma. But let's start. So we start by doing, if we say the four, what we went through with Vajrasattva, the first is to kind of, in a very practical way, have a sense of regret or a sense of unpleasantness. Like, yikes, I scolded my beautiful wife. Now she's going to remember that for 40 years. I better be careful and pretend I didn't say it, and perhaps she'll forget in 30 years rather than 40 years. Or whatever it is. But feeling some sort of, often the Tibetan, as we said last week, was Vajrasattva. Sunchimba taught in Tibetan the power of Sunchimba. Sort of, the metaphor is always like you've eaten a poison food. Like you went to let's say, McDonald's. No, well, let's not pick on McDonald's. Denny's. And you ate something, and later you watch the news and you hear, oh yes, 24 people have just been taken to a hospital from blah, blah, blah restaurant, eating blah, blah, blah. So Sunchimba is the feeling of having eaten poison or having eaten rotten food. In that way, your own negative karma is a little bit like that. And these things are usually done unconsciously, aren't they? Or with a sense of self-righteousness. You get angry at someone and you insult them or say horrible things to them or do horrible things to them. And these things happen quite almost unconsciously, and often on the basis of self-righteousness. I'm in the right, that person is in the wrong. But still, any harsh speech, and Dharma Buddha said that any harsh speech is not a Buddhist practice. It's a barbaric tendency coming out unconsciously. It's like blurt out. It's like people suffer from Tourette's, whatever comes up in mind. And it's always funny to be around with Tourette's, because if you say something like you know is going to irritate them a little bit, they'll start shouting all kinds of things. Don't do this. This is just in comic theory, not in practice. But people tend to have a little bit of Tourette's when they become self-righteous and irritated. And it's always to do with a sense of ego and a misunderstanding nature of self. And based on that comes anger or attachments and so forth. And based on that comes misunderstanding the nature of others, a misunderstanding of interconnectedness and so on. And we do something negative, or we say something negative, or we think something negative, but don't. So anyone will think something negative quite spontaneously. You can't control the original thought about it. What you can control is thinking that feels good, to feel self-righteous and to feel like I was yelling at this person or hitting them on the head with a piece of paper. A rolled up newspaper, bang, bang, bang. Take that, you cad, bang, bang. A soft paper, because not hard newspaper. Recycled paper. So the cause of goodness, of course, of merit, is when anything like this arises, to reverse it, reverse the thought, reverse the words, reverse the physical action. Sunchimbe Tab and power of reliance, which means refuge, bodhicitta, just chanting a refuge or bodhicitta verse. You can just, Sangye Chodam Sagisho, or you can do Namo Guru Bhya, Namo Buddhaya, Namo Dhammasaya. You can go Om Mani Padme Hum. You can do any kind of, if you're a Catholic, you can go Holy Mary, Mother of God, who had sex with God. Lucky girl. It's like Margot Kidman having sex with Superman in Superman 3. Or maybe even better, who knows? And for the next 3 kids, she had to put up with that Joseph, who wasn't such a great lover. I shouldn't make Catholic jokes, being an Irish Protestant by birth. Irish Protestant become Buddhist. Reliance or foundation, as one of the Lama puts it, it just means when you fall down, you just quickly land on the ground and you use the ground, which is refuge and bodhicitta, as your foundation of getting back up with joy and clarity, not with distorted mind. And the conscious determination not to do it again. Like, for instance, there was this one clip on the news the other day of 2 kids practicing shooting BB guns. And one of them put a can on his head, and the other shot at him and missed the can, but hit him in the eye. So you should make a determination. I will not do that again. William Tell, the old William Tell story, but without the William Tell, I don't know if everyone knows that story with the apple on the head. I think it's from Switzerland or something, or Austria. Luckily, he was a better shot than was that fellow with the BB gun. But that opponent for us, the determination of, you noticed you messed up, you screwed up, you made a boo-boo. And the determination not to recreate, to what, not to engage in that again, that silliness. And then the opponent force. And the opponent, the direct remedy is either medicine, this practice here, or Vajrasattva, or chanting sutras. Sometimes they say making satsa. You can even make water satsa. You go sit beside a river meditating, and you take a satsa mold, and you take out the mold, and you scoop out a thing of water, and it's got an image, say, of Vajrasattva in it, and Gom Vajrasattva Hum, and you pour the water back in, and you scoop another one. That's a very nice way to make satsa, because you don't need a lot of artistic talents. You don't get your hands dirty when you make them from clay. You're all covered. Our Sangha member friend Changwala, he loves making them out of plaster. You get that white guck all over yourself and all over the floor and all over the table. Of course, they're beautiful when they come out, but then you've got to paint them, and then you get paint all over yourself and all over your clothes. And water tsatsa, scoop. Oh, that's awful. No mud, no plaster of Paris, no paint. But do it where they have clean river, not downstream from some chemical plant. Or not downstream from a farm where all of the chemical fertilizers are washed into the river. What else? No, that's enough. We just avoid those 3. In Tibet, they always like to do them below sacred springs, because at the same time, a spring is always a seat for a naga. Nagas, nature spirits, love springs. So if you do them below them, the water coming out is filtered by the earth, totally clean, and is blessed by the naga. And the most popular in Tibet was to do them in a guru chusin, a spring which had been created by Padmasambhava. So Padmasambhava, amongst his numerous talents, was a dowser. And I don't know if you know dowsers. In the old days, before putting in a well, you'd have a dowser going around with willow and find exactly where the water is. So he would douse you go through places that were very dry, he would douse and he'd take his staff and go bang on that spot and say some mantras. And probably it's not said it, it's always made it seem like he just banged it with his staff and it popped out. But my own what you call it, suspicion is that the people traveling with him then took a pick and shovel and went crash, 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 and came dug a little bit of a hole in there to help the spring come out. So that's very popular as a remedy. But here we're just looking at this one. Now, the 35 Buddhas, who are those guys, you might ask? Sure, they're good looking. Sure, they look muscular and well shaped. Certainly, they look meditative, all of them sitting cross-legged with a nice Ushnisha Buddha bump on top of their head. They've got all of that, but who are they? So we have a lot of the, Mahayana is very much into reincarnation. And when we look at reincarnation, when we go back over our lives 1,000,000 years ago, and 900,000 years ago, and 500,000 years ago, the last 1,000 lifetimes, and so on, the Buddhist idea is that people who become Buddha sort of catch the current of enlightenment, catch the Chinle Buddha karma, the energy of enlightenment, and take up enlightenment pursuit. And of course, if you're born in a time now when we've got Tantra, you can go from 0 to enlightenment in one lifetime. But in many occasions, that was not the situation. There was no Tantra. Just that like insight stuff and Vipassana stuff and few other kind of practices, samadhi and all of that, but no Tantra. So difficult to get enlightenment in one lifetime. So the Bodhisattva path would take countless lifetimes over 3 eons. Incalculable eons. We're not quite sure how long an eon is. I came up on a game show one time when someone said 1 billion. Who knows, right? Maybe it's 1 trillion. Anyway, the idea is as we develop toward enlightenment, whether it's 1 lifetime or 16 lifetimes or 1,000 lifetimes, each lifetime our spiritual maturity grows. And so then we have various Buddha forms, like the 7 medicine Buddhas, with Shakyamuni making the 8th medicine Buddha, and we did some of that practice a few weeks ago. In each of those cases, it said those were bodhisattvas practicing the enlightenment path. And each of them took a kind of a special vow or determination. When I achieve enlightenment, I'm going to manifest in ways especially strong for this or that kind of healing. Or we have Tara, Bodhisattva Tara, female Bodhisattva Tara, going, oh, men, I like my own form of boobies, etc. And I'm going to remain female every lifetime from here to enlightenment, to become an inspiration to females, that you don't have to like switch back, forth, back, forth, back, forth, back, forth, back, forth, back, forth. Is that enough? Back, forth, back, forth, back. And so she remained female until her enlightenment and manifested enlightenment. And you could say, therefore, she is the name of Tara, meaning Tibetan Dharma, meaning liberator or liberated. So you could say she was the founder of the female liberation movement in the conscious statement of female liberation movement in the Buddhist world. Otherwise, Buddha said no difference between men and women in terms of achieving enlightenment. But of course, social structures were such that sometimes men were given a little bit of an advantage. Some other social structures, undoubtedly, women were given a little bit of advantage. In Buddha's time, it seems that men had a little bit of an advantage. And therefore, Buddha was asked that by a man. And he said, either can achieve enlightenment equally. So then Tara, of course, said, ha ha, I've been promoting that idea for multi-lifetimes, mega lifetimes. And so then Buddha taught the Tara Tantra, the way of practicing cultivating female energy, and so on. The way of Tara, we have the medicine Buddhas like that. And then we have this collection of 35 Buddhas of purification, of Shakpa, of splitting open. And they are in the same sort of sentiment as the 8 medicine Buddhas, in that each of them made a precept or made a special vow: after my enlightenment, may I be of a special benefit to those suffering from various karmic obstacles. And of the 35 obstacles, and we could say 7 connected to form, 7 connected to feeling, 7 connected to perception, 7 connected to activity, 7 connected to the sort of natural clarity of the mind, or the inner posture of the mind. And that becomes the 35. Now, there's sort of debates. If you go to Burma, Bangladesh, Thailand, there's a lot of temples to 28 Buddhas. And then in India, it was very popular of Sangye Rabdun, the 7 great Buddhas. So it seems like 28 and 7 coming to 35 is perhaps more than a coincidence. But it could be the blending of 2 traditions, you could say, of purification, healing, and so forth. And of course, the 7 medicine Buddhas could go with the 28 to make 35. So it's hard to say how these all come together. In terms of textual foundation, then coming from the Buddha, he taught a sutra called, and because it's in Sanskrit, I'll read it, the Ratnakuta Sutta, which in Tibetan is Gonchok Segpa, a big bunch of jewels. Big Segpa means like piling one on top of another. Like you put a rock here, and then you put a rock on top, and you put a rock on top of that, and a rock. Those are called Segpa. So you could call it a pile of jewels or a collection of jewels, but Segpa literally is kind of an architectural building term, you could say. So in that text, Gonchok Segpa Do in Tibetan, and it's a very popular text. You can buy it in many markets, book markets in Nepal, and Tibet, and Bhutan, and places like that, because people like to chant that in general as a whole collection. It's got it's a couple of 100 pages long, and this is one little section of it. So that's this literary source, you could say, coming, and it's called a Do, which means original words of Buddha, but a collection of words of Buddha. So Buddha in different times, different places would do this. My first teaching on it actually came from a Karma Kagyu Lama, my first Karma Kagyu Lama, who was Bero Kenze Rinpoche. And in Bodh and that's other the winter of 72, 73, or the next year, 73, 74, I can't remember, because my GPS does not have calendar settings exactly. I remember the place, I remember the occasion, I remember the visual. I remember someone in the room who did fart. No, I don't remember that. And I remember Rinpoche's wonderful presence. And I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 times a week, he'd give a couple of hour session. And each time someone would request something, and one day he transmitted medicine Buddha practice, and another day, and so on, for about, I would say, 10 or 12 very specific practices in that way. So I originally received from him. And later, when I was thinking of doing some prostrations, because it was kind of popular, I lived not too far from Dalai Lama's temple, and going up and down, a lot of Tibetans would go there during the day and do a few hundred prostrations. So I thought it'd be nice to stop in. And I was getting a teaching on on a kind of a general Lam-Rim. It wasn't a specific one. And in it, this came up, and then the mention was made that it was the way in which Marpa did his Mundro and his prostration. So I thought, oh, Marpa, I kind of looked like him. I'm not so chubby, but at that time, now I've come to equal him. Even in chubbiness, I have come to equal him. And so I thought I would like to do that. So I asked for another teaching on it and clarification of doing it in that way. Because when Bero Kenze gave it, he just taught it as a kind of a general practice, not as a preliminary practice. And so he taught, gave the lung and then did a reading, gave explanation and so on and so forth like that, but not as how to do it with prostrations, just how to do it as a called in Tibetan a gomde, meditation with chanting. And I think it's very nice to do as meditation with chanting. So we do start with refuge like that, and we start with the 4 remedial forces of Sun Chimbe Tob, Tempe Tob, and I think Pembe Tob, the resolution force, and Yembe Tob, the actual remedy. Then we start the chanting of the 7. Jamba, Chumbende, Digi, Chepa, Trajamba, Yonda, Bar, Zope, Sange, Pa. Oh, Yawasaki, Tobala, Chansalo. So only the Buddha is given that long Deshin Sheba, Tathagata, Trachamba, Bhagawan, Yang Dakbar, Zope, Sange, Samyak Sambuddha, Pal, Shri, Yalwa, Vera, Shakya Tuba, Shakyamuni. So a very long one is used for Buddha himself because he transmitted, you could say, the teaching in the what? The Ratnakuta Sutra. And comes to Nagarjuna and Asanga and down into Tibet. And so, there are, I think Jonas dug out an English translation. I didn't look through to see who did the translation. You might know, but I don't know.
Well, actually, I don't know either, but
Okay.
one I found that looked quite good.
Yeah, I did a translation, of course, many, many years ago, because when I was doing the practice, but that's long before the days of personal computers, so it was a typed copy, and ended up with typed copies of various things I had practice I had done, translation I did that I never published and just disappeared. But anyway, I'll just read a Deshin Shepa, Trachamba Yandaba, so that's Buddha, Deshin Shepa, Dojin Yingpo, Radu Jambala, Chatsalo. So here we just say Tathagata, Deshin Shepa. Deshin Shepa, gone to thusness. It just means achieved realization of infinity, but able to totally integrate infinity with the finite. Doje Ningpo, by means of Vajra essence, Rabdu Jampa, eliminating all obstacles, Lachatsalo. So each of these names, you could say, is a name of a Buddha, but probably also having the sense that by Vajra Vidya essence, the heart, Vajra heart, great strength, we can eliminate any negative karma. We can overcome every negativity. Deshinsheba Rinchen Tre La Chatsalo. The Tagata, so Chaksalo, prostrate, but Chaksal literally means kind of invoke, like Tsongkhapa did full prostration. I don't know what Marpa did, because it's not said in his biography or mentioned very much. But he is mentioned in the text on this practice as one of the people who greatly popularized it amongst early Renaissance practitioners. And here, the force for curing negative karma, you could say, and this is Akshobhya, so in the skanda of form, ancient utra, by emanating jewel radiance. In other words, you may be as irritated as a hornet who has been brushed aside from a flower by some 3-year-old kid, but you emanate a little bit of jewel light and the negative stain of your. So for me, each of these names has a kind of a spiritual meaning like that. And it's like my name, Glenn, comes from Gandharva, Glendower, in early Scottish, Celtic, which came from India, from Gandharva, spirit of the valley. So I like my spirits fermented and distilled in valleys. And therefore, in Scotland, most single malt scotches have the name of valley this and valley that, Glen this and Glen that. So I'm spirit of the valley. And as you know, valley spirits are a little bit playful and mischievous. They're a little bit, when they're female, they're often like nymphs, which came to have a kind of an overly sexualized meaning in Western psychology. Nymphomania. You could say I'm a great admirer of nymphs, if it's used in a male sense. I'm manic. No, I shouldn't make jokes about psychological misuse of terms. We can make jokes about psychological terms, but not misuse of terms. Kishin Shepa Luwangi Gyalpo, and that's the one that stands out in every painting because it's a blue body with a white head. So Buddha as king of the Nagas. And this is actually given as a tantric initiation. There is a kind of a yidam practice, you could say, which is Luwangi Gyalpo, where you invoke the king of Nagas. And when you have problems with Nagas, you will invoke this Naga thing and you'll do the mantras of Luwangi Gyalpo and so forth. But I think Luwangi Gyalpo here really king of nature spirits, I think, in terms of a purification practice, really means understanding the self-purifying nature of simple life on planet Earth. You know, we have rotten vegetables in our garbage can and we put them in a compost heap and they become healthy fertilizer, and we put them in the soil and they give rise to beautiful things. It also, I think, means living in harmony with nature, respecting nature. Like for many years in Dharamsala, I translated for people with various health and other problems. And one time out of 22 or 23, maybe that's not an exact number, don't quote me, the divination will come up as Naga problem, and always to do with some kind of disrespect of nature, cutting trees without really respecting them, or just being very out of harmony with one's connection with nature. So I think in some ways it has that kind of a meaning. Relationship, Pao De. Pao is, of course, a great hero, and perhaps here Pao De. De means can even mean like a real force of them, like almost like an army. It's the same word, Jiangsu Sempa. It's the same word, bodhisattva, has the meaning of sattva. But it means through strength and courage. So it doesn't matter what kind of negativity one has created from a spiritual point of view, with clarity, with determination, all negative karma can be transcended. Therefore, in many texts, we see things stated like just like Buddhas of the past were all ordinary at one time, and they applied themselves with great effort to Dharma, to meditation and practice, and achieved enlightenment. So too can I. Dejin Sheba Kelgi, Dejin Sheba Rinchen Me, Dejin Sheba Pelgi. K actually means something like happiness. It can mean kind of like a celebratory force, glorious celebration. I think that goes along with Buddha's teaching that practice joy at all times, even if you feel like you just ate poison. Joyfully encounter the diarrhea. After all, it's an intestinal cleansing. And it is one of the best cures for constipation. I think I once told the story when I was in India. I was on the train and some little Indian guy sits down. I was talking about the food in India being a little not totally in harmony with my palate. And he said, "Oh, you Western people, you come to India, your stool becomes normal and you think you are so constipated. Your stool becomes normal and you think you have diarrhea." So, Tijin Shepa, Pel Je. Well, because this is form, I think, like radiant happiness or radiant joy or radiant celebration. And that's a kind of a way, I think, of facing up to our eliminating the sort of down in the dumps feeling we get when we do something we're really unhappy about or unproud about. Not celebrating having done that, but celebrating perhaps that we noticed that it wasn't something we like to do. We would like to, it's a habit we have which we should break, something like that. And the jewel fire. Fire, of course, is one of the great purifying forces. Very often, if someone has a wound in the old days, they would take a sword and heat it a little bit and put it on the wound, and it cauterizes the bleeding, but at the same time kills any bacteria. And of course, we boil water if we're not sure how clean the water is to kill bacteria and so on and so forth. So those are for the form, and the others I'll just read through them just as kind of a lung, you could say, giving an oral transmission. Station Shepa, Tangwa Dunya, La Cha Salo, Tangwa Dunya, meaningful to perceive, meaningful to meet. In other words, I think anytime we meet, when we notice a negative activity or negative habit we have, seeing that becomes meaningful if we release it and transform. Teishin Chepa, Rinchen Dawa, Jewel Moon, Teishin Chepa, Trima Mepa, stainlessness, Teishin Chepa. That's like, cooking in a Teflon pan without the negative chemical side effects of Teflon. A non-stick pan. If we can make our mind a little bit like non-stick. Buddha gave the example, be like a bird flying through space, leaving no footprints. I mean, you learn from your flight, but at the same time, you don't get dragged down by, what you got right and wrong, but rather you use them as guidelines. Teishin Shepa, Pelgi Chimba, Teishin Shepa. Sangbala Chatsalo, Teishin Sampe Chimbala Chatsalo, Teishin Shepa Chui Lala Chatsalo. Teishin Shepa, Chui Lala Chatsalo, Teishin Shepa, Palzan La Tachalo, Teishin Pepa, Sendem Pala Chatsalo, Teishin Shepa, Zizi Taye La Chatsalo. I like that one better. Zizi Taye. Boundless shining. Zishi. If you look at something you really like, it almost shines with goodness, doesn't it? Like a new car. Wow, I love that new car. Or like a new motorcycle. Wow, love that. It sort of shines with allure. So in this way, boundless shining. In other words, if we can make our own, and this is to do with feeling, I like, I don't care. This is in the third category of the Ratna. So if we can, with all things, have that sense of boundless radiance. Deshin Shepa, Upal, Upal, glorious radiance. Is like light and Deshin Shepa, Young and Mepe Pal, Chatsalo. Young and Mepa, without any suffering, beyond suffering. Glory beyond suffering. Deshin Shepa, Simegi Bula, without any craving. In other words, these are kind of guidelines to how we learn to transcend the negative habits of mind. Then we come to the reds, Amitabha. The first one, that first one was Amitabha, Sime uncraving. Deshin Shiba Metokpa, like glorious flowers. And of course, Buddhists like to use the example of the flower grows in mud and dirt and filth and comes up looking pretty. Deshin Shiba Sambe Uzer, Nampar Rolpa, Ngumpar Kimbala. That's a very cute name. I think the next time someone asks me for a Buddhist name, I'll give them the invitation Shepa Sangbe Uzer Nampar Rolpe Ngumpar Kiamba. Excuse me. Let's give that to Gosha. What's your name, Gosha? My name is Tejan Shepa. Sangbe Uzer Nampar Rolpe Ngumpar Kiamba. Kiamba means a kind of knowing. It's a little bit like in Dzogchen literature, the word rigpa, keeping kind of authentic mind or clear mind or a natural mind, something like that. And rolpa means playful, a playful, clear, joyful mind, which is uzer, radiant with light. And what kind of light? Sangpa, Brahma, like the god Brahma. So for Indians, they like the god Brahma. So they think he shines with lights. So this is pure mind, playful mind, shining with lights equal to those of God the Creator. In Hindu mythology, Brahma thinks he created the universe. Deshin Shiba Pama User Nampa Rope Gumpa Kyamba. Oh, that's even better for Gosha, isn't it? Deshin Shiba Pema User, the lotus-like light. Nampa Rope Gumpa Kyamba. A pure mind, a joyful, playful, pure mind, in the aspect of lotus radiance. So again, these are all associated with Amitabha and the lotus family, and therefore, and lotus family is perception, and his very name means boundless light, right? So there's a lot here on lights. Teshin Shepa Nor Pal, the radiance of jewels, and Teshin Shepa Trembe Pal, the radiance of mindfulness. Radiance of mindfulness. In other words, we can only progress spiritually through the power of mindfulness, taking control of what happened, what's going on now, and how to redirect the boat of our life. Teshin Shepa, Sin, Pel, Jintu Yung Trakpa, whose name, Tathagata, whose name completely resounds throughout. Well, Shinto Yongwa, throughout very much everywhere. Shinto is very much, and Yongwa is everywhere. Who are you? I'm that guy whose glory, radiance of my name resounds very much everywhere. Would you repeat that, please? Oh, I'm the guy whose glory, glorious name resounds pretty much everywhere. But I think when we say that, this, Amitabha is associated with the wisdom of emptiness. wisdom of Atma. So therefore, boundless light. To have an outer, if you have an outer limit, you will have a center. With no outer limit, you cannot have a center. The center is always the center of the outer limit. If it's on the right and left, it's the center between right and left. If it's circle, it's right at the center of the circle. But if it's boundless light like Amitabha, then your self-identification embraces all things. I think the meaning is something like that. And then we go to green. Amoga City, Wangi Toki Gelsengi Gyalpo, king of Gelsens. Or the king, you could perhaps with a Gelsen, a victory banner, Wangi Tok, and at the very top of all powers. Some people translate that Wangpo is referring to Wangpanga, the five senses, but other people just refer to it as the five powers and as the spiritual power and so forth. So in other words, it's the green power of activity, a king with a victory banner. When we have the first four skandhas kind of all running right, and the first four Buddha factors running right, then the activity naturally becomes like a king riding with a victory banner with all sensual satisfactions as the jewel on top. Tishin Sheba, Shuntu Numper, Numbepal. And the Buddha, which completely, the glory which completely outshines, perhaps you could say, Tishin Sheba, Yul Le Shuntu Numper Gyawa, like a king of all negative forces, overcoming all negative forces. And Tishin Sheba Numper Nupa Shepe Pal. I'll just see how these guys translated that. But Tashin Sheba against Tagada, Kunne, Nampar Kupe Pao. Kunne is from all sides, Nampar Kupa, just greatly radiating, the glory greatly radiating things from all sides. Tashin Sheba Rinchan Pema, Nampar Nupa, like the glorious Rinchin Pema, like a lotus jewel, number Numba, completely outshining. Tishin Shepa, Dong Yang Dakba Sope Sangye Rinchin, Rinpoche, Dong Pemala, Raptu Shupe Wang Kyapo Chazalo. Oh, that's a really nice name. Tishin Shepa, what's your name? Trachomba Yang Dakba Sope Sangye, Rinchin Che Tang Pemala, Raptu Shukbe. Rigi Wangi Gapo. Wow. That could almost pass for a Russian name with all of its syllables. But in short, Wangi Galpo, the king of powers, which reside of Riwang. Ri is like a kingly mountain, a king of great power, mountains of power, which resides at the center of a lotus and precious jewels, which of complete Buddhahood and so forth. And now that's the 35, 7 each for the 5 Buddha families. But we throw in one more verse, we don't want to leave anyone out. It's like when someone wins the Oscars at the end, they think, well, I really like to thank my producer and my co-stars, and I probably left out 100 other people, but please know you're all in those very little types that run by at lightning speed at the end of the movie that no one ever gets to read. But anyway, thanks. So those are the 35. Tidala Sopagi, Chok Chu, Jinjige Kam, Tamshe, Tishin, Shepa, Trachon, by Yonder, Bazopa, Sanki, Chomdende, Kong, Jinye, however many Buddhas, those, etc., Chok Chu, Jigdan, in all 10 directions of the world, complete enlightened Bhagawan Buddhas. Kang Jinshi, however many as they are, Shugpa residing there. So Shingbe Senge Chomden De Tedakla in whatever places, Buddha fields, and so forth. Please pay attention. So this is, you could say, calling attention to the 35 and to whatever Buddhas. And the next section is they could say the splitting open. Taki Keditan Kewa Toma Tama La Mijeba Ne Korwana Korwe Kekewa Chengi Dipele Gibatang Jitu Sawatang Kipa La Jesu Yiranga Chutengi Koram. So Taki, I who am called Jonas. Kewa Togma made in lives without beginning. Tamama Chiwa beyond count. Korawana Korawek, circling in the realms of samsara, Kene Tamshi, throughout all the different world systems. Jigpa Lejipa have certainly created occasional negative karma here and there. Itu Sawatong, and have engaged like that, and Jipala Jesu done myself, and Jesu Jesu Young rejoiced in them, and also did things like Chotengi Koram stole items from sacred places. Again, stole from the sanghas. Chokchu Gendun Koram stole other things from dedicated to spiritual purposes. Trukpa Tukpadang Trupala Jesu Yirong have engaged like that, encouraged others, or have been rejoiced in Ding. Semanga also probably did some of the 5 inexpiable karmas, killed mom, killed dad, raped a celibate, and drawn blood from a Buddha. There's one more in there somewhere, but I've never done that particular one. The other 4 I did. I remember the 4 I did. Mom, Dad. Let's just leave it at those 4. The other 5, because I can't remember, and it doesn't matter if you've done them. You don't have to bother. You also, like me, have never done. Have rejoiced in, done others to do, and rejoiced in. Migewachu, and also with all 10 negative karmas, and I've engaged in, rejoiced in, encouraged others to do, and and because of that, those karmas have had many lower rebirths, like the hells and the ghosts and animals, and Yul Takoba, been born in like Yul Takoba, barbarian lands. I might have been born in a barbarian land, even in this lifetime. Okay, Lachim. And Takoba, like very remote places, and Lalor, places with only barbarians, and like those with long-lived deities and gods, like Brahma and the such. They live a long time, but they don't do much Dharma practice because they're having such a good time. They forget Dharma practice. Been born with not complete senses, blind or deaf or something. Born with really silly superstitions and views. Or in a place where there was no enlightened beings. And here Tamshe Sengye Chomden De Yeshisu Gyowa, Jensu Gyowa, Wangtu Gyowa, Samar Gyowa, Kembe Jig Tedaki, Changarlu, Tolo. So in front of all enlightened beings, in front of in the presence of their wisdom and their wisdom eyes and their great spiritual presences and all of that, their great knowledge. Teraki, Chengar, in their presence, Talo, Chaso, Mitalo, mi pe do. I acknowledge, face, release, and determine to transcend such negative karmic ways. And cut off, make a strong determination to cut off all such negative behavior, bringing about such negative results. So that's the second heap, the second mountain, the second pile. The first one is the chanting the names of the 35 Buddhas. The second, releasing or splitting open. And this are previous lives. I'm quite happy with having done those in previous lives and gotten them done and over with, so I don't have to do them in this lifetime. That's me personally. Be better, of course, if I hadn't done them in a previous lifetime, but very possibly I did. So, and let it go. And then the third one, and again, all Buddhas of the 10 directions, give me your attention, please. Hey, listen up. Come out of your sleepy meditation and listen clearly. In this life and in all previous lives. With beyond the numbers of previous lives, circling in the world and in this world and many other worlds is Shimpa Tana Dundro Kene so Kepa Della have practiced generosity with beings in other realms, even animals, and Gewa have these kind of roots of virtue. Many roots of virtue. Gewetsawa. I like that, Gewetsawa, the root of virtue. The root of goodness. In other words, a kind of a seed. Every time we do something negative, there's kind of a negative seed, something positive, a positive seed. This can go on forever and ever and ever. But if we can straighten out our direction in life, we can grab hold of the positive and let go of the negative. Then we can go in the direction of enlightenment. Then, of course, eventually we get the perception of emptiness and how all things, good, bad, and indifferent, are of one taste. And we can all let all of those forces just rise and fall like white and dark clouds in the sky. Then we get it. So firstly, so he goes through the 6 perfections here. So first with giving, surely, and also with I've practiced some sultrim, sungi, gewasawa, whatever there is from that, from previous life, daki samparchupa, gewasawa, whatever sort of pure activities, all of those roots of word, daki simchin, yumsu, mimpar kiwa, gewa, sawa konlala, whatever is there. Kongi Janju Shoktu Sengipa, Gewe Sawa, Konla Lakpa, and whatever Chuktu Semkipa, whatever bodhicitta aspirations and practices, Daki Lana Mepe Yeshigi Gewa, and in terms of the great goodness of cultivating the root of wisdom, the root of goodness, which is a primordial awareness. The stainless primordial mind, written, of course, peerless here, referring to emptiness. I take all of this and I put it together. Zoom, I make it into a big snowball. Well, I gather it all together in a big ball. Maybe it's not really a ball, but anyway, something like that. Dumte, gather together as one. Domne lana meba chipa, kongna machiva, koma, kongkoma lana meba yandaba zope ngoa, and dedicate all of that to the peerless, the highest, and so forth of whatever is there, ngoa. Lana meba yandaba zope janjuto yungso ngoa, to dedicate to my accomplishing of the state of the very state of peerless enlightenment itself. Just like every one in the past who ever achieved enlightenment in that way, gathered together all of their forces of goodness and made dedication. Jitar ma jongwe sangi chomdende nangi yunsu moa gyurwa. Just like all Buddhas in the future will have to gather together all of their inner forces of goodness and dedicate that to enlightenment. And Jitar Dewa Shue Senge Chomdende Namgi Yunsu Moa. And just like all the Buddhas of the present, those accomplishing the enlightenment right now will have to what? Have to what? Yes. Gather together and dedicate it to enlightenment. And Shinju Daki Kyung Yunsu Ngoa Chio. In that same way, I myself dedicate all of the roots of goodness of myself and my every interaction with all other living beings throughout the 6 realms, gather all that and dedicate it to my achieving enlightenment. So it's a little bit like buying a new car, right? You have to take a little bit from that bank account and a little bit from that bank account, and you have to go out and hawk your 1963 Gibson Les Paul, which was once played by, who played a Les Paul? The Who, I think, they liked Gibson Les Paul. You may even have to go to your credit rating and get a little bit of a bank loan, and you dedicate all of that, and you get your new car. In that same way, by taking together whatever strength of goodness, clarity, joy, positivity you have in this and future lives, putting them all together and dedicating to enlightenment. Buddhas of the past did like that. Buddhas of the future will do like that. Buddhas of the present are doing like that. In that same way, I do that. In the same way, I release any negative karmic forces. Samche Kenyi Jesu Yirango, and I rejoice in the goodness of all enlightened beings, past, present, and future. Samchen Tamche Lani, Gulshin Soa Debsos, and I make requests to all Buddhas. Daki Lana Mepe, Yeshigi Chok, Dampa Taba Kirchi, and this is my request. May I achieve through this invocation of the 35 Buddhas the release of all my negativity and the invocation of all of my inner strength. May I, Daki Lana Mepe Yeshe Chok Dampa Toba Kyoshi, may I Toba, may I gain or achieve or realize Dampa, the supreme Chok, perfect Lana Mepe Yeshe, peerless Jnana, or primordial awareness. Michok Gyal Gyalwa Kangda Data Showa. And Kanda Depa Kanda Deshin Kawamana Yindin Napa Yander Su Gyatso Trawa Kunla Telmo Jawe Kebsu Chio. And in that way, putting my palms together, ho ho ho, he, ha ha ha, I make this request to the supreme Buddhas, living Buddhas amongst human beings, and all of the enlightened masters who of the past, present, and future. And may I achieve that Yundenga Tayepa Getso Trawa Kunla to all of those who are completely like oceans, vast oceans of enlightenment qualities. I make that request. And the request, of course, is to inspire me to quickly release negativity, generate realization, and accomplish enlightenment. And sometimes before doing this, after doing the refuge on bodhicitta, we'll do a kind of an increase mantra. I'll give the lung on that, just so we have the lung on the whole little text, as well as the little bit of transmission. And you can repeat it after me. Oh,
Om
Namo Manjushriya.
Namo Manjushriya.
You forgot the Om.
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 Om Namo Manjushriya.
Om Namo Manjushriya.
Jushriya.
Shushriya.
Namo Uttara. Shriya.
Namo Uttara Shunya.
Soha.
Soha.
That's the first one. And the second one, Om Namo
Om Namo
Manjushriya.
Manjushriya.
Jushriya.
Jushriya.
Namo Uttama.
Namo Uttama.
Shriya Soha.
Shriya Soha.
And then the third one, Om Namo Manjushriya.
Om Namo Manjushriya.
Shushriya.
Shushriya.
Namo Uttama Shriya Soha.
Namo Uttaya Shriya Soha.
And we can just chant perhaps some of the Manjushri mantras, because this practice is associated or was taught by Buddha to the Bodhisattva disciple Manjushri. In other words, it's in the wisdom practices. Wisdom practice really means cultivating a deeper awareness of the nature of self and the relationship between self and objects of perception. And so here, everything we do, everything we say, everything we think is kind of an object of perception, you could say. And our understanding of our relationship between who am I and what is this, in other words, the things we do, is key to developing the wisdom factor. The relationship between oneself and one's deeds of body, speech, mind are a kind of, you could say, wisdom factor. And so I'll just write, whether we say Om Marapatanadi, perhaps 21 times, just out of, aspiration to deeper wisdom. And that this ability to basically celebrate the forces of enlightenment that are everywhere throughout the universe. Secondly, to release any of our own limitations and obstacles. And thirdly, to find joy in all of our own powers of goodness, well, all of the good qualities that we ourselves have, and seeds of great blossoming that we have. Om Marapatanadi, 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 Om Marapatanadi. Om Marapatanadi, 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 Om Marapatanadi. Om Marapatanadi, 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 Om Marapatanadi. So in this way, this kind of practice is used as a kind of, you could say, spiritual healing. And I think it is very important for people to connect to these three things, this idea that all these forces of enlightenment are out there in the universe. And if we can open ourselves to that sunshine, it becomes like a flower that's closed in darkness, and the sun comes up, and the power of the sun opens the petals of the flowers. And I think in terms of negativity, we have a lot of, it's quite common in humans for them to do what we call beat themselves up. I screwed up like this, I screwed up like that, I screwed up like this, I screwed up like that. And of course, because of that, Angulimala became a disciple of Buddha. He had killed almost 1,000 people, and Buddha told him, no big deal. No, if it was 100,000 or 200,000, but a mere 1,000. No, he didn't say that. But he said, whatever anyone does, if they can touch to their primordial nature, their Buddha nature, and eliminate all negative karmic instincts, seeds, and touch to that wisdom and joy and clarity, which is enlightenment, then all of that negativity just dissolves like dark clouds in the sky. And so it's important that we realize that about ourselves. And of course, when we chant the names of the Buddhas in that way, the 35 Buddhas, and our own 5 skandhas, you could say, is healing for our 5 skandhas. It's also strengthening our tantric practice, because we're reviving or sort of arousing some kind of clarity on the nature of the 5 Buddhas that we are embodying as our crowns, whether they're jewel crowns in Kriya Tantra, or they're dried skeletons in highest yoga or Mother Tantra, or they're dripping human heads in some Father Tantra or male Tantra sides. That sort of stimulates those kind of wisdom awareness factors, you could say, within ourselves. And thirdly, understanding that we don't just have to go with what we are in this life for how to achieve enlightenment. We can draw on our roots of goodness from lifetimes without beginning. And that's often said in the lifetime of Buddha, that during the night of his enlightenment, in the first watch, he realized that. In the second watch, he realized like something else, and so on. And one of them is like, he could see 500 of his previous lifetimes and draw on those roots of goodness. And then it went to infinity, being able to draw the root of goodness from infinity. And of course, when one achieves full experience of the emptiness and somethingness of being, the emptiness is the infinite clarity of our own mind, and the somethingness is all things radiating within that infinite clarity. We can see how those radiant presences can be completely transformed by the radiant awareness. So anyway, thank you all very much for allowing me to speak on this wonderfully beautiful little jewel practice that's so easy to engage in. I always did it in Tibetan. I've never liked any of the English translations, because those names can be quite long. And in Tibetan, the names sound very beautiful, and it's written in very poetic language, and is purposely translated poetically. But if we want to make a translation literal, keeping it poetic is difficult in English because of the difference in the language structures. So it might be good to sort of do the names of the Buddhas in Tibetan, if you can do so, but only if you like the sound of your tongue going yeah, making some sounds which are kind of rare in English. Yawadin Yorda. Jambayongi, Matrabjerne, Trawachik, Malapati, Salagupa Shojanjo, Samcho Rimachema Kipana Kipan Yampa Mepayom Kone, Kondu, Pelwar Show. And maybe Jonas can send out those 2 photos just as kind of examples. I'll see if I can find one where they're actually all 7 in the colors, as sometimes they're stacked, but that seems to be a rare way of doing them.
Thank you so very much, Lama.
Thank you, Lama, for this precious transmission.
And yeah, we do share the pictures and some text for the practice, and then we'll see you on Monday.
Yeah. Have a beautiful weekend. Thank you, Lama.
Bye bye for now. Ciao.
Bye.